The dark childhood of Saddam Hussein. Before the palaces, before the statues, before the tyranny, there was only a boy abandoned by fate, shaped by cruelty, and destined for infamy. This is the story of Saddam Hussein, the child who crawled out of the ashes of Tikrit to set fire to a nation, born into a curse, a town without mercy. The year was 1937. The place Tikrit, Iraq. A town where life came cheap and hope rarely knocked. It was here that Saddam Hussein was born, a child whose name meant the one who confronts. But what would he confront first? His father, gone. His brother, dead. His mother, broken, with no man to protect her and a dead child already buried. Saddam's mother nearly gave up. Some claim she even tried to abort him, unable to face raising another child alone. But destiny refused to let Saddam die that easily. The man who built a dictator. As a toddler, Saddam was handed off, not to safety but to a man who breathed hatred. His uncle, Khairallah Tulfa, was no loving guardian. He was a fanatical Arab nationalist who believed in vengeance and racial purity. Under Khairallah's roof, Saddam learned not love, but loathing. He read stories of foreign devils, betrayal, and glory drenched in blood. At night, he slept with a dagger under his pillow, and by day, he memorized speeches of violence. This wasn't a childhood. It was indoctrination. The boy with empty pockets and a burning heart. In Tikrit, Saddam was dirt poor. His classmates mocked him, called him names, shamed him for having no father. But he didn't cry. He didn't break. He just watched, silent. Patient. Dangerous. Some nights he went to bed hungry. Other nights he stared at the ceiling, whispering that one day he'd make them all pay. It wasn't just poverty that shaped him, it was the humiliation that came with it. They saw a sad, quiet boy. But inside him, something was brewing, a storm of vengeance. He didn't want sympathy, he wanted control, while other kids dreamed of becoming doctors or teachers. Saddam dreamed of power. Even as a child, he believed the world owed him something, and he would take it. By force, if he had to. The first crime, blood on a young hand. The turning point came at just age 14. A local man, allegedly connected to the monarchy, was found badly injured after a street altercation. Witnesses whispered that young Saddam was involved. No arrests, no investigation, just silence and fear. It was the first time his name was tied to violence, and it wouldn't be the last. Even in his teenage years, he had learned, if you silence someone early, they never rise against you. School of Shadows, where ideas became weapons. He made it to high school in Baghdad, but not for an education in books. He was there for recruitment. There, he joined the underground Ba'ath Party, a political group that believed in Arab unity through any means, even death. For the first time, Saddam felt seen, respected, feared, empowered. He wasn't just a poor boy from Tikrit anymore. He was a weapon waiting to be unleashed, and soon that weapon would be pointed at Iraq itself. The rise begins. By the time he was in his early 20s, Saddam had already been imprisoned, tortured, and hunted by the government. But nothing stopped him. He escaped prison, went into hiding, and plotted his return with cold precision. The poor boy from Tikrit was gone. In his place stood a man who had mastered pain, a man who believed that mercy was weakness, and fear was the only true power. He had learned that people don't follow leaders out of love. They follow them out of terror. The birth of a revolutionary, Saddam's first steps into power. Joining the Ba'ath Party and early political activism. The boy who came from dust was now looking for fire. In the slums of Tikrit, he learned pain. In the arms of his uncle, he learned hate. But in the alleys of Baghdad, he learned how to turn both into power. Saddam Hussein was no longer just watching, he was ready to act. Baghdad, a city of revolution and revenge. The capital was boiling. After years of British control and royal puppets, Iraqis were rising, angry, hungry, and ready for war. Into this chaos came a teenage Saddam. No money, no allies, just a name people barely knew, and an ambition they would never forget. Baghdad was a battlefield of ideas. Communists shouted for workers, royalists clung to the past. And then there were the Baathists, a new breed of revolutionaries preaching Arab unity, total control, and ruthless nationalism. To Saddam, they weren't just a party, they were destiny. The Ba'ath Party, Brotherhood in Blood, in 1957, at just 20 years old, Saddam Hussein swore allegiance to the Ba'ath Party, but this wasn't your average political club. The Baathists weren't filing papers or giving speeches in suits. They were plotting, training, and preparing for something bigger, the total overthrow of Iraq's monarchy. Their slogan was simple: unity, freedom, socialism. But behind those words was a hunger for absolute control. And Saddam? He was their most promising enforcer, quiet, obedient, and terrifyingly focused. He wasn't there to write policies. He was there to get things done, no matter what it took. The assassination that changed everything. In 1959, the Ba'ath Party made a daring decision. They would assassinate the Prime Minister of Iraq, General Abdul Karim Qasim, the man who had taken power after overthrowing the king. The mission was suicidal. But Saddam volunteered. Armed with a pistol and a hunger for blood, he and his team waited on Baghdad's Rashid Street. When Qasim's convoy approached, bullets flew. It was chaos. Windows shattered. People screamed. Qasim survived. But Saddam became a wanted man overnight. Some of his comrades were caught and executed. Others disappeared. Saddam, he ran, and once again, he survived. The exile, training a tyrant. Saddam escaped to Syria, then to Egypt under a false name. But this wasn't downtime, it was preparation. In Egypt, he studied law. In Syria, he studied something far more dangerous: covert warfare, propaganda, and fear. The Ba'ath Party was expanding across borders. And Saddam, he was becoming more than just a loyal follower. He was becoming a planner, a strategist, and a man who believed that destiny owed him a throne. Every move, every handshake, every enemy remembered. He was playing a long game, and he was playing it ruthlessly. The return. The snake slithers back. By the mid-1960s, Iraq's government was collapsing under pressure. The Baathists were gaining ground again, and Saddam Hussein returned home, not as a scared youth, but as a trained revolutionary. He knew the streets. He knew who had betrayed them. And now, he had the skills to make them pay. Within years, Saddam would rise through the Ba'ath Party, ranks with frightening speed. Not through charm, not through kindness, but through elimination. Anyone in his way simply disappeared. The boy from Tikrit was gone. Now stood a man who believed violence wasn't a tool. It was a language, and Saddam was fluent. Blood in Baghdad, Saddam's first taste of treason. The failed assassination attempt and exile, Baghdad, 1959. A car engine hums, a convoy approaches, and in the shadows, a 22-year-old man grips a pistol. His mission: to end the life of Iraq's prime minister. But what if he fails? This wasn't just a political act. This was the birth of Saddam Hussein as a killer. And the moment that would send him fleeing, hunted, and ultimately reborn. The target, Prime Minister Qasim. After overthrowing the Iraqi monarchy in 1958, General Abdul Karim Qasim became the new face of Iraq. But not everyone celebrated. Qasim refused to share power, especially with the rising Ba'ath Party. He cracked down, arrested dissidents, and grew suspicious of everyone, including his supposed allies. To the Ba'athists, Qasim had betrayed the revolution, and betrayal demanded blood. A plan was set: eliminate Qasim. Publicly, brutally, without mercy. And guess who volunteered? A young unknown Ba'athist from Tikrit, Saddam Hussein. The hit, Rashid Street, becomes a war zone. Baghdad's Rashid Street, Saddam and 5 other Ba'athists took position near a corner. Hidden weapons, nervous fingers. The tension. Electric. Qasim's convoy turned the corner, then chaos exploded. Bullets ripped through the air, screams echoed across the street. Saddam opened fire, not once, but in a flurry. But something went wrong. Qasim's driver was fatally struck, his aide wounded, but the Prime Minister himself, alive, bloodied, shocked, but alive. And in that moment, Saddam Hussein's name became synonymous with treason. The escape. A wounded fugitive. As bullets flew, Saddam was hit. A bullet tore through his leg. Some accounts say his thigh, others say his hip. He collapsed in the chaos, bleeding into the dirt. But he didn't surrender. He crawled to safety. Somehow, with the help of loyal Ba'athists, he was smuggled out of Baghdad, from house to house, alley to alley. The manhunt began within hours. Posters went up. Doors were kicked in. Other attackers were arrested, executed, disappeared. But Saddam, he vanished. Into the shadows, Syria and Egypt. Saddam made it across the border to Syria, a Ba'athist stronghold. There he was hidden, treated, and introduced to a deeper world of revolutionaries. They didn't see him as a failure. They saw him as a hero, a survivor, someone who had dared what others feared. Eventually he was moved to Cairo, Egypt, a city brimming with Arab nationalism and radical ideas. In exile, Saddam wasn't idle. He studied law at Cairo University, but behind the textbooks. He trained, he organized, he sharpened his mind like a blade. He began reading Stalin, Machiavelli, and Arab nationalist manifestos, not as a student, but as a man planning his return to power. The transformation. From fleeing gunman to political strategist, in exile, something inside Saddam changed. He was no longer the hot-headed youth with a pistol in his coat. He was becoming a strategist, a future leader, and above all, a survivor. He had failed to eliminate Qasim. But he had won something far more important: experience, connections, and the reputation of a man willing to kill for power. And next time, he wouldn't fail. Failed assassination attempt and exile. The Cobra returns. Saddam's deadly rise in Ba'ath ranks. He vanished in blood and chaos. He fled with bullets in his body and a bounty on his head. For years his name was whispered, then forgotten. But now, after years in exile, he was back. And he wasn't the same boy who had missed his shot. Saddam Hussein had returned to Iraq. And this time, he wouldn't miss. Return of the Cobra. But months later, that government collapsed, violently. So he waited. Patient, focused, dangerous. Then, in 1968, the real opportunity came. The Ba'athists staged a successful coup. No gunfire, just swift political strangling. President Abdul Rahman Arif was removed overnight. This time, Saddam didn't watch from the shadows. He walked straight into Baghdad, not with an army, but with a list. A list of people to remove, replace, or erase. The party within the party. just a loyal follower, a soldier of the cause. But they didn't realize Saddam wasn't there to serve. He was there to take. He began working as deputy to the president, Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr, his distant cousin. Outwardly respectful, quiet, unthreatening, but behind the scenes, he was building his own empire inside the party itself. He controlled the secret police, the intelligence services, the prison systems. He didn't just watch enemies. He created them, and one by one, they began to vanish. The master manipulator, Saddam Hussein, had no formal military background. He didn't lead armies or win battles, but he mastered something far more dangerous: paranoia. He tapped phones. He had his rivals followed. He placed spies inside every ministry. Even the president was being watched. He created a culture of absolute fear, where speaking too loudly, even in your own home, could lead to disappearance. And Saddam? He smiled quietly as his enemies destroyed each other. Blood oaths and silent eliminations. In a televised purge in 1979, though still a few years ahead, he would make top party members confess to false crimes before they were taken away, never to be seen again. But this wasn't sudden. The seeds were planted now. Every act was calculated. Every ally was watched. Every threat was removed quietly, like a snake in the grass, striking when no one was looking. By the early 1970s, President al-Bakr looked strong on the outside. But inside the palace, Saddam was already running Iraq. He negotiated oil deals. He forged ties with the Soviet Union. He expanded Iraq's security forces, not to protect the country, but to protect himself. And in every cabinet meeting, one thing became clearer and clearer: Saddam Hussein wasn't second in command. He was the real power. The rest were just waiting for their turn, on the chopping block. July 1979, Saddam's blood-soaked coronation, a quiet resignation, a loud takeover. July 16, 1979. President Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr resigned. The official reason? Health issues. But behind closed doors, the truth was far darker, because the man replacing him had been waiting, calculating, planning, watching, and now Saddam Hussein stepped forward. Not as a servant of Iraq, but as its master. The smile before the storm. Saddam's rise to the presidency wasn't a celebration. It was a trap. Weeks after taking power, he called an emergency meeting of top Ba'ath Party leaders. Rows of officials sat nervously in a grand hall. Suddenly, Saddam stood up and dropped a list of names. He calmly announced that a conspiracy had been uncovered. He pointed to comrades, colleagues, even friends. One by one, they were escorted out. Some sobbed, some shouted, some begged, but none returned. Televised terror, Iraq watched in horror as Saddam broadcasted the purge on national television. Dozens of high-ranking officials were forced to publicly confess to treason, their faces dripping with fear, their voices trembling as they read prepared statements. And Saddam, he sat quietly, smiling, calm, like a man pruning a garden. By the end of the day, over 60 officials were executed. No trial, no evidence, just names and bullets. With blood still drying in the execution yards, Saddam Hussein looked into the cameras and said, "We are cleansing the party for the future of Iraq." But everyone watching knew the future now belonged to one man. Voices silenced. Saddam's reign of fear and repression. Mass killings, torture and crushing dissent, the silence of a nation. Under Saddam Hussein, Iraq didn't speak. It screamed in silence, because every time someone dared to raise a voice, that voice was buried, sometimes beneath prison walls, sometimes beneath the sand. Blood behind closed doors. Saddam created more than just secret police. He created factories of pain. In notorious prisons like Abu Ghraib and Nugrat Salman, men, women, even teenagers were shackled, beaten, burned, and broken. Why? For speaking. for writing, for thinking differently, or simply for knowing someone who did. Confessions were forced, truth was irrelevant, and when a prisoner's body couldn't take more, the message was sent to their family. Your son has gone missing. No grave, no explanation, just fear. Whole villages erased. This wasn't just about individuals. Entire ethnic groups, tribes, and towns were targeted. In 1982, after an attempted attack on Saddam's motorcade in the town of Dujail, he retaliated by ordering over 140 people executed, 1,500 arrested families, displaced farmlands, destroyed in 1988, during the infamous Anfal campaign, Saddam's forces used chemical weapons against Kurdish civilians in Halabja. The skies rained poison. Within hours, over 5,000 people collapsed, gasping, foaming, dying. Many were children, and Halabja, it became a ghost city of death. The forgotten hell, Iran-Iraq War and Saddam's chemical nightmare, the Iran-Iraq War, 1980-1988, and use of chemical weapons. The war nobody won. In 1980, Saddam Hussein rolled tanks across the Iranian border, seeking glory, power, and revenge. What followed was not victory, but 8 years of trench warfare, 1 million deaths, and a legacy soaked in chemicals. It became known as the First Gulf War, but in reality, it was a modern-day apocalypse. A war fueled by fear. Saddam feared the rise of Iran's new Islamic regime after the 1979 revolution. He saw a vulnerable neighbor and an opportunity to strike. But he miscalculated. Iran responded fiercely. The war escalated into a brutal stalemate. For 8 years, soldiers on both sides lived like rats in muddy trenches, while cities were bombed, oil fields burned, and children were sent to the front lines. But when bullets and bombs failed, Saddam turned to poison, death in the air, chemical warfare. Iraq became the first country in modern history to mass deploy chemical weapons, mustard gas, taboon, VX, sarin. These weren't battlefield tactics. They were acts of terror. Thousands of Iranian soldiers and civilians were hit by invisible clouds. Their lungs burned, their skin blistered, their eyes melted in their sockets. Entire villages were gassed without warning. Hospitals overflowed with screaming victims, and yet, the world watched in silence. Why? Because Iraq had Western allies. The West saw Saddam as a buffer against Iran's growing revolution, so his crimes were ignored. The night Saddam invaded Kuwait, the spark of the Gulf War. Invasion of Kuwait, 1990. The desert turns hostile. On the night of August 2nd, 1990, the world changed in silence. While Kuwait slept peacefully, Iraqi tanks thundered across the border. In just hours, one of the Middle East's richest nations was swallowed whole. No declaration, no warning, just invasion. And in that moment, Saddam Hussein became the world's most dangerous man, greed, power, and a trap. Why did Saddam invade Kuwait? It wasn't just oil, it was debt, dominance, and delusion. After the long and costly Iran-Iraq war, Saddam's economy was in ruins. He accused Kuwait of economic warfare by flooding the oil market and undercutting prices. Worse, he claimed Kuwait was stealing Iraqi oil through slant drilling. His demand? Billions in compensation. When Kuwait refused, Saddam made a chilling calculation. If the Arab world won't help me, I'll take what I need. In just 2 days, his army captured Kuwait City, installed a puppet government, and declared Kuwait the 19th province of Iraq. The world reacts with fury. The reaction was instant and explosive. The United Nations condemned the invasion. Economic sanctions rained down. But Saddam stood firm. He mocked the world, daring them to act. He believed the West would not risk war over a tiny Gulf state. He was wrong. The United States, under President George H.W. Bush, launched Operation Desert Shield. Tens of thousands of troops poured into Saudi Arabia. A global coalition began to form, ready for war, and by January 1991, the world teetered on the edge of a storm. The rebellion that drowned in blood, Saddam's post-war crackdown, crushed uprisings after Gulf War. Using violence, hope turns to horror, March 1991. The Gulf War had ended. Saddam's army was broken, his regime shaken, and across Iraq, a dangerous hope began to rise. The people believed the tyrant was finally weak. But what they didn't know was this: he wasn't defeated. He was furious. The spark of rebellion. In the Shiite south and the Kurdish north, Iraqis rose up. They took to the streets with bare hands and stolen weapons. Shiite rebels stormed military bases in Basra, Karbala, Najaf. In the north, Kurdish fighters launched their own uprising for independence. They believed the United States would support them. After all, America had just bombed Saddam. But Washington held back. And Saddam did not. Saddam's brutal revenge. Saddam struck back with merciless fury. In the south, he unleashed the Republican Guard, firing rockets into mosques and slaughtering protesters. In Karbala, shrine walls were riddled with bullet holes. In Basra, entire families were dragged into the streets and executed. Meanwhile, in the Kurdish north, Saddam used helicopters and artillery to raze villages. Hundreds of thousands of Kurds fled toward the freezing mountains. "If you rise against me," Saddam once warned, "I will destroy your roots." And he did. More than 100,000 people were gone in just weeks. Children, elders, clerics, fighters, all buried beneath silence and sand. Weapons of mass deception. The invasion that changed everything. US invaded Iraq in 2003. Over WMD accusations, the drums of war begin again. 2 years after 9/11, the world was still bleeding, and one name kept surfacing. Saddam Hussein, Washington. Claimed he had weapons of mass destruction, chemical, biological, possibly even nuclear. Weapons that could reach America's allies in 45 minutes, and in March 2003, with a single strike, the US invaded Iraq. But what they found was not what they expected. The case for invasion, President George W. Bush and Prime Minister Tony Blair said the evidence was clear. Saddam had WMDs. He was hiding them. He had defied UN resolutions for years. The UN asked for more time. Inspectors on the ground hadn't found anything, but the US said time was up. "We will not wait for the final proof," Bush said. The smoking gun could be a mushroom cloud. And on March 20th, 2003, the skies over Baghdad lit up with fire. Operation Iraqi Freedom had begun. Hawk and awe and doubt. The first days were swift. Saddam's military collapsed. His palaces were looted. His portraits were burned in the streets. The world watched as a dictator disappeared and a nation unraveled. But where were the weapons? US troops searched bunkers, labs, desert warehouses. They found nothing. No WMDs, no active program, no threat. It was the greatest intelligence failure of the 21st century, or, some believed, the greatest lie. The night Saddam was found, captured by US forces, December 2003, the hunt narrows. For 8 months, Saddam Hussein had vanished into the shadows. No broadcasts, no sightings, just whispers in the dust. US forces called it Operation Red Dawn. And on December 13th, 2003, just outside Tikrit, his birthplace, the net finally closed, and what they found stunned the world. Operation Red Dawn begins. 2 sites were targeted, codenamed Wolverine 1 And Wolverine too, near the Tigris River, near where Saddam was born. Soldiers combed the area for hours. They found weapons, loyalists, caves. Then, behind a small farmhouse, a patch of earth looked strange, a fiberboard lid, a rope. Silence beneath. They pulled it open. What stared back at them was a bearded, exhausted man with dirt under his fingernails and defeat in his eyes. The fall of the untouchable. My name is Saddam Hussein. I am the president of Iraq, and I want to negotiate. That's what he said. But the world had already stopped listening. The once mighty dictator, the man who ruled with fear, silenced millions, started wars, built palaces of gold, was now pulled from a hole the size of a coffin, unshaven, disoriented. Powerless U.S. forces checked his mouth for DNA, shaved his beard, and filmed every second. The footage was released. Iraqis cheered. Some wept. The monster was now in a cage. The gallows and the ghost, Saddam Hussein's final hour, executed in 2006, end of his rule and legacy. The last door closes on December 30th, 2006, as the world celebrated the arrival of a new year in Baghdad. A door opened. A dictator walked through it. For the last time, Saddam Hussein, once Iraq's unshakable ruler, was now prisoner number one in a U.S.-controlled facility. No longer feared, no longer untouchable. And in a few minutes he would meet the end he never imagined. The trial and sentence. His trial began in October 2005, in front of the Iraqi Special Tribunal. He was charged with crimes against humanity for the 1982 Dujail massacre, where 148 Shiite men and boys vanished after an attempted attack on his convoy. Throughout the trial, Saddam was defiant. He yelled at judges, refused to recognize the court, claimed he was still the rightful president of Iraq, but the world had heard enough. On November 5, 2006, the verdict was delivered. Guilty, sentenced to death by hanging. He smiled, cold and composed, as if the ropes waiting for him didn't matter. The final moments, before dawn on December 30th, guards entered his cell. No tears, no pleas. He was taken to a secret execution chamber in Kadimia, near a Shiite shrine. As the noose was fastened around his neck, he exchanged verses with the clerics, until someone shouted, "Muqtada, Muqtada, Muqtada," a reference to the Shiite cleric Muqtada al-Sadr. Is this how real men behave? And then, in a flash, the floor dropped. The dictator who built monuments to himself was now buried beneath the very soil he once ruled. Aftermath and legacy. His body was flown to Al-Auja, his birthplace near Tikrit. Buried before sunrise, quietly, surrounded by loyalists. But the man's death didn't bring peace. In the vacuum Saddam left behind, Iraq fractured. Sectarian war engulfed. The streets, militias took control, and eventually, a new evil rose from the chaos. ISIS. His legacy is one of fire and fear, a reign that built highways of death, rivers of silence, and cities of whispers. Some Iraqis remember him as a monster, others, strangely, as a symbol of lost order. But history is clear. Saddam Hussein ruled with an iron fist and fell through a wooden trapdoor.
The case may be closed, but criminology never sleeps. Like and subscribe at Join Criminology and step deeper into the dark with us.